This is John Strong. You're listening to Soccer Made in Portland.
Welcome Timbers owner and president, Merritt Paulson.
This might take away your Merritt Paulson tweets segment.
No, we already did the Merritt Paulson Twitter update just to make sure we got it in. Garth Lagerway, Real Salt Lake general manager.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
An interview that we did with Kenny Cooper.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for the kind words.
Jim Rylett, he is the Timbers U23 coach.
For whatever reason, you have Kelly there because he's really not very good at what he does.
Opinions, yes. Factual information, that remains to be seen.
That's never stopped us before.
Good Tuesday morning, everybody, and welcome to Soccer Made in Portland here on the North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. This is Mao speaking. Kelly McLean is here as well. Good morning, Kelly. How are you?
Good morning. Quite well. Lovely day in the Rose City.
It is. It was a beautiful day out at the coast. We both enjoyed some time away over the weekend. Nice having the Timbers game on Friday, so we could take advantage of the full measure of the long weekend. Like I said, NASN.TV and NASNradio.com is where you can find this show. If you're listening there now, that's good. You've already found it. If you're listening on podcast, be sure to check that out if you're available during the live times, 10 a.m. on Tuesdays and 3:30 p.m. Friday afternoons, and those are Pacific time. Be sure to check out our show page at NASN.TV. We've got links for iTunes and RSS downloads for podcast. So if you can't listen live, that's the next best way to go, and you can just subscribe there and have those sent directly to you. We've got a Facebook page. We're on Twitter at SoccerMadeInPDX, and of course we also have NASN Portland. Posted a story about Kosuke Kimura and his feelings about playing in these games against Colorado, two in a row being a bit of a weird thing, but just in general how he's kind of reacted, how things are going for him, transitioning from 6 years in Colorado to moving here a short time ago in Portland. So check that out. That's NASNPortland.com, and we're on Twitter at NASNPortland. And before we get into the first of those two Colorado games, which happened on Friday, as I mentioned, a quick day in history, September 4th, 2008, 4 years ago today, the Timbers won 4-0 against Miami FC. That wasn't a particularly great season for the Timbers. In fact, they were last, but they did win 4-0 on this day. I think the only September 4th game in Timbers history. Byron Alvarez, Cameron Dunn, and Chris Brown, who scored twice, tallied the goals on that day. So, let's talk about the Timbers defeating the Rapids, something that we've never said before in MLS. 3 defeats, heavy defeats, and two of those games Timbers lost at home, of course, last year. To review our predictions, I said the Timbers would win, Kelly said the Timbers would win, and Trevor said the Timbers would lose. So Trevor was wrong, and we were right. Hard to argue with that.
I don't know how he could have predicted a Timbers loss. I think everybody was gearing up for a Timbers win on Friday night. Although it perhaps wasn't their greatest of performances recently, but they did do a nice job of taking care of business and getting it done and getting the clean sheet, which it's been a long time.
Yeah, I think it had been those 2 back-to-back 0-0 games between Columbus at home and Houston away back in May. That was the last time the Timbers recorded a clean sheet, no matter whose fault that was, defense, goalkeeper, both, or strange other events conspiring against, regardless, first clean sheet in a long time. So let's talk about it. The Timbers won. You've already sort of made mention to the fact that it maybe wasn't the prettiest game or the best game or even the best example of the new system or style, however you want to put it. But what do you think overall about the Timbers winning for the second time in a row, for the first time all season?
Yeah, that was kind of another big thing, was getting back-to-back wins for the first time. I rewatched the first half of the game, and honestly, I thought the first 25 to 30 minutes or so was pretty good. I thought they controlled things pretty well. Colorado took over a little bit for a 10-minute spell or so, and there was kind of a lull until things picked back up in that last 5 minutes leading into halftime, when obviously they scored the goal and Songo had his shot deflected and then miraculously kick saved. And then Nagbe has hit a little run through where he should have scored as well. Great ball from Songo. So I think overall I was pretty pleased rewatching the first half again. I didn't rewatch the second half, but at the time I just remember thinking the whole half was kind of a bit of a lull. And Gavin talked yesterday about how he felt they sat back a bit too much. It didn't press quite enough. And I don't know if he talked about if that was just the way things played out, or if that was something that they talked about at halftime, maybe not pressing quite so much, and then maybe it just got a bit overdone by the guys out on the field. I don't know if he talked about that at all, but yeah, the second half was pretty blah. But you know, in the end, it's another win. It's a streak. It's a shutout. I still think there's plenty of positives to take out of it.
Yeah, I do too. I think the biggest positive to take out of it, apart from the goal that was scored, which we'll talk about here in just a second, was the fact that they did hold on to win. And there was every reason for them to draw or lose that game in the classic way that we've seen it happen before. Two shots, near the end of the game, the second of which was in injury time. So the first being the Cummings header that was just wide, and then the Andre Akpan shot that was sort of a layoff from Castrillon and blasted it just wide of the post. I mean, both of those were pretty nice opportunities, and Gavin talked about that yesterday too. That Colorado is going to be pretty angry coming into the game on Wednesday, because they should justifiably feel like they should have gotten more out of that game than a loss. Even if you only just take those two chances at the end, let alone some of the other parts of the game. But all of that said, that is sort of a positive for the Timbers. They don't have very many examples of not being on the ropes necessarily, but having a lead, not giving up another goal, not sort of collapsing at the end. You could say the defense sort of did collapse at the end and just got lucky that the shots didn't go in, but at the end of the day, the score remained 1-0. So I think that's something that they can really build from. And it seems like in this little stretch that they're getting, every game is a little bit different, and they're getting something positive in a slightly different way from each game, even when the results haven't been wins. Like, I think they took a lot from that New York game, especially the first 30 minutes or something. But just in general, getting out to a fast start, that's something that they never do. The Toronto game, coming back from behind to get a draw on the road, both those games scoring on the road. Then this game holding off a team, getting a clean sheet. Vancouver getting a win after not winning in 2 months. I mean, each little thing it sounds ridiculous, but they are actually, I think, picking up little bits of confidence in different ways that are starting to add up to a level of confidence that doesn't really befit their standing on the table, but given the sort of recent trends, actually kind of makes sense. I mean, they can actually, you could read quotes from players that talk about confidence and not say, what are they even talking about? They're at the bottom of the table or second to bottom, they're having a terrible season. That's not sort of the way they're looking at it right now. They're kind of ignoring the way the season was going earlier and just taking what's been going on in the last month or so and using that as the what they want to use to define the season. So I think it's good to get a win in a different circumstance. Obviously, everybody at the Timbers and fans would have been happier if they'd won 3-0 and hadn't had, the sort of scares at the end of the game. But it does give them a little bit of something different than coasting to a 3-0 win would have done.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the goal, because I know you had some specific thoughts about the way that goal came about and the build-up to DK scoring.
Yeah, I thought that goal was fantastic. I thought everything about it was what the Timbers are trying to do in this formation and with this personnel. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Horst who played the ball to Chara to start the sequence. It was either Horst or Mosquera. I believe it was Horst. Chara comes very, very deep, almost to the edge of his own 18-yard box to get the ball, to start the possession. He's able to turn around. There's nobody immediately marking him, and that maybe is more of a function of what type of team Colorado is, playing with two holding midfielders and sitting a bit deeper than perhaps others do. Nevertheless, Chara is able to turn, look upfield, spots Nagbe, plays it through the middle of the field. Nagbe, or not immediately to the wing. Nagbe playing in a central midfield position. He gets the ball. He's able to move forward. He's able to look up, play it out wide to Zizo, who's been sort of running alongside him. Zizo turns the burners on, flies past a completely hopeless Tyson Wall, who's got to hope that he never ever has to play against the Timbers in Portland again. He had, I think, both of the own goals in the Seattle game last year in Portland, at least one of them anyway, deflected in, and he had a really bad time keeping up with Zizo all night. So anyway, Zizo flies around the corner. DK, who's playing as the lone striker, which we'll get back to in a minute, is able to make a nice run off the ball, get in behind the central defender, and Zizo plays a perfect ball across that is just far enough the defender can't get to it, just far enough out that the goalkeeper can't reach it. DK just smacks it in the net. I mean, it was incredibly simple, but it took advantage of exactly the way that the formation is built to take that ball from defense, not to lump it up forward and hope that DK can head it down to someone else, not to send it straight out to Zizo and make him beat someone off the dribble at midfield. No, it's play it through these guys who possess the skill sets in each position to best take advantage of the scenario, and it worked perfectly. And that's, I think the silver lining for the Timbers, and we can talk about this too, is that while the formational play didn't really work very well, mostly due to the setup that Colorado had, again, the two holding midfielders, and I want to talk about that too, but despite that not necessarily working as well, the system, the style, whatever you want to say, they were able to get out on counterattacks and take advantage of the speed and skill of Nagbe, Zizo, Chara, and Songo. And we just haven't seen that much of them really getting out into nice counterattacks and actually then putting it in the net. We've seen it a few times, Mwanga's goal against San Jose. We've seen a few other ones, but that one was like the just a totally perfect way for the Timbers to score using the system that's in place right now, and presumably a system that will be somewhat similar to what Caleb Porter will want to do going forward.
Yeah, it was a great all-around goal, and you mentioned Mwanga's goal earlier. It was sort of, for me, a little bit reminiscent of that. Just, it was very, sort of direct in a way, in just that they did, not that it was direct in Route 1 direct, but it was direct in that each guy took minimal touches and just did exactly what they needed to do. There was no extra fluff or anything like that. They just went boom, 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 and in the back of the net. It was great. It reminded me a lot of that Mwanga goal. So yeah, great to see. And I think another maybe example of a bit of the maturation of Bright Dike a little bit. He was very thoughtful throughout the course of that play, where he was running, where he was moving, and when the ball went out wide, it was just immediate to make that run back to the far post and expect the ball to come across and be ready for it. Yeah, it was all around a great goal. Another goal we should have had clearly was the Nagbe attempt, and I think perhaps maybe even bigger than, I guess, Nagbe's touch and missing that goal was the ball he got played from Songo. And, Songo, lots of people are talking about how he's playing a lot better recently and that he's started sort of coming alive and getting comfortable. And just a play like that really shows you the quality and the vision that he has to thread that ball through at least 5 or 6 guys to catch Nagbe making a run completely in behind the defense. And that's sort of another piece, because we've mentioned this before, how back a while ago, Spencer would talk a time or two about how a lot of these guys like to play in front of defenders. And I think we've seen that a ton. Nagbe likes to play in front of defenders, and Songo as well, and even in Khalif like to play in front of those guys and move the ball around and pass it, and that's great. But at some point, you've got to stretch the defense. You've got to put them under pressure. You've got to get in behind them. And that was a great run by Nagbe, which, frankly, we don't see very much of from him. He is a guy who plays a lot in front of defenders, and he's great at it. Give the ball to his feet. He'll keep possession. He'll play it wide. He'll play it back. He does not give up the ball very easily, no matter if it's one guy behind him or 2 guys behind him. But he doesn't get in behind defenders very often. And it was, first of all, a great run by Nagbe coming across the back to cut in behind and look and show that motion that Songo could see, that he could play one in deep and get in behind the defenders. But it was a great ball by Songo, and I don't know, for a minute, I sort of, again, want to hammer on Nagbe not using his left foot. I just can't help but wonder if he wouldn't have been comfortable using his left foot if that wouldn't have been in the back of the net, something that we talked about over and over again. But I don't know. I rewatched it again, and I'm not sure. I'm surprised that he missed it, even with his right foot. But there's this part of me that can't help but wonder if he hadn't just used his left foot, if that wouldn't have been in the back of the net.
Yeah, and I think seeing a ball like that from Songo also shows the value of the formation, because I think if he's playing as an outside midfielder and there are 2 forwards ahead of him and there's maybe someone on the same side of the field and there are sort of more bodies in the middle of the field, I think it's less likely that he can play a ball like that. But I think with the sort of option that he needs to come back and track back, and that's sort of kind of how he got the ball in the position he did. But if there's nobody ahead of him, there's nothing but space. He can just see that open field. He can see Nagbe making the run from off, out of the corner of his eye, and play it into all that space, and there's nobody there. And just the ability to have a guy like Songo be able to play balls from the back or come up and send a cross in or beat a guy to the end line or whatever. I just can't stress enough, to me personally, how much I think that the formation has really, really helped Songo and Zizo be good, even though what they do is different. Both of them having space and but rarely having someone running in front of where they want to go just opens the field up for them to be creative, whether that's with lots of moves or passes from Songo or just running down the field like Zizo. If there's nobody in your way, you've got some options, and I think that's really opened them up. And I think, going back to DK for just a second, I actually thought the first half an hour or so, while I thought the Timbers did well overall, I thought DK was fairly poor at the beginning of the game. I thought when things got kind of clogged up, and maybe we can start talking about Colorado's setup, because this will be important, I think, for the Wednesday game coming up as well. When things got kind of clogged up and the Timbers were sort of doing to make a basketball reference, like a half-court set, they sort of would get the ball, they were possessing the ball, there was nothing wrong, but they weren't really going anywhere. DK gets a little bit lost in there. When there's not an option for him to make a run, be it through the channels or whatever, I feel like he kind of gets in the way a little bit. And once the game opened up on a couple of those counterattacks, and he's either able to make a run for the ball or make a run that opens up space for Nagbe, he's much more effective in that kind of a system. So I thought it was really good for him. Not that he was doing anything terrible. I guess poor isn't the best way to describe it. But I just didn't think he was very effective as sort of a center forward in a slowed down, kind of grinded out possession style. And that's kind of where I start to ask questions about what's going to be the future with Caleb Porter, because it seems that it's not that Porter's opposed to counterattacks, but he seems to really want to get into a style where they have the ball and possess it for long periods of time and be patient and, take advantage of these off the ball runs. But I think DK is really good when he's got lots of space to make runs into, and when that space is compressed either by where the ball is within the half or by having two center backs and two holding midfielders in that area. I feel like he's not necessarily the best option. Not that another guy in the Timbers is right now, but for that kind of a style going forward, I'm not really sure. But getting opened up was great, and then he got to do. I mean, he's shown for the last couple of games he can make those runs all the time, and he was in exactly the right place. And then I felt like he was much better after that, just getting a little bit of confidence, feeling like, oh, I'm not just trapped in the 18-yard box trying to make sure I don't get in the way of a shot from Nagbe or something. I mean, he seemed to get more into the flow of the game a little bit after that, after the goal. But yeah, let's talk about that setup, because I do think it limited what Nagbe could do when the Timbers were not on the counterattack. And I thought the counter was their, well, to use a terrible, just the best counter to that, setup. But when it was slowed down, he really had nowhere to go. I mean, either Thomas or Larentowicz was on him, man marking, and they just alternated so that as soon as one guy got tired or whatever their sequence was, they just flip-flopped, and it was really effective.
Yeah, it was, and you could tell a couple times Nagbe got a little bit frustrated. Larentowicz gave him an extra, little shot here or there, a little extra bump. And at one point, as the play continued on, Nagbe turned to the referee and kind of raised his hands and said, and complained a little bit. And so I think they did do a little bit to take him out of the game. But in all honesty, that's what Larentowicz does and has always done. And now he's got a pretty good partner to help him out doing it. I imagine those two guys probably key in on whoever their opponent is, that they probably key in on whoever they feel their biggest playmaker is going to be, and just try to take them out of the match as much as possible. And I imagine that's what they do every game with every team. So when they play Portland, and that's going to be Nagbe, it'll be interesting. I'm sort of intrigued by this whole notion of playing the same team back to back. It's obviously it's not too common general in soccer in general, let alone MLS. Obviously Major League Baseball does series, and that's not a big deal. And even in the NBA, that happens. It's not infrequent that you have the same team on back-to-back nights or in quick succession, but it doesn't happen too often in MLS, and I'm curious to see what adjustments we're going to see, whether it's personnel, whether it's tactical, whether just the approach they're going to take to the game. I'm pretty intrigued to see how and if anything changes in that aspect. Are both teams just going to put out essentially the same lineup and the same formations and do the same thing? Is Colorado going to come into this game with Thomas and Larentowicz thinking the exact same thing? Well, let's just clog up Nagbe as much as possible, because a lot of stuff goes through him, and then we'll see what we can do from there. Or are they planning on Portland maybe making some alterations? I think that'll be pretty interesting. But clearly Nagbe had a bit of a tougher time. They were keying in on him, and I think you could see that in the play. I think Nagbe really is sort of, I guess, a hub. I think a lot of things go through him, even when it seems like he's not, attacking. Even when it seems like all he's doing is just maintaining possession and he's not really having the killer pass or going forward, he's playing balls square, he's playing them back. It really does affect things when he's not consistently and constantly doing that. It is disruptive. It doesn't seem like much of a flow. It seems sort of like it's pointless passing, but it's not. It's keeping that flow going. It's keeping that possession going. Sometimes it's not always glamorous. Sometimes for 20 minutes he's going to do nothing but take 1 or 2 touches and play it back to Jewsbury. But that's part of the flow and the build-up and the rhythm that the team gets into, and any amount of disruption that comes in there is going to hinder things. And I think we saw that a little bit. So I'm interested to see, that specific little instance, but just a bigger picture as well. Do we see the same lineups, the same formations, the same sort of tactics on Wednesday that we saw on Friday?
Well, I think we're definitely going to see the exact same starting lineup for the Timbers. I think nothing's going to change in that regard. I think we'll see the same formation, the same everything. Obviously, the subs are going to be slightly different because Rodney Wallace isn't going to be available due to national team duty. Now, but Colorado's side, they've got a little bit of a different aspect to this because so they brought in Cummings at halftime, and at first they just played him out wide to the right. They had Casey up top by himself, and then they ended up moving Cummings up top along with Casey, and then they made more moves after that. But Omar Cummings is not going to be available at all either due to national team duty. So that was something that Gavin sort of really keyed on yesterday after training and kind of looking forward and saying, they don't have a lot of pace. Like, yes, they are big. Yes, they are tough and physical. And, they clogged up that space. They did all the things that you'd expect them to do, but they don't have a lot of pace. And as you mentioned earlier, Gavin said that he thought maybe they sat a little too deep, and that on the road in Colorado, he wants to play a little bit higher because he doesn't think they have anybody who can beat them in behind. That Casey is a good striker, but that he's not going to make that breaking run and split the defense in half, doing that. So it sort of the way they treat this is going to be interesting. We also got to hear Gavin yesterday talk about Nagbe struggling a little bit to find space. And it was interesting. I mean, obviously the manager isn't just going to go out and say, well, here, let me give you the exact game plan of what we're going to do, the 2 days before the game. But his answer was basically, well, if Nagbe's having a good game, he'll find space. And, even though they nullified him, we won anyway. So it was kind of a weird answer that, instead of saying, oh, well, we're hoping that DK can, even if you just pay lip service and say, oh, we're hoping DK will make some runs that'll take some defenders with him and that'll open up some space. He didn't really say that. He basically just said that Nagbe will find ways to expose space. But, and he mentioned the size of Colorado's field. And I completely agree that it's easier for a team like Colorado to smash things in and clog things up in the middle on a really narrow field with those two holding guys there, because there's just nowhere. I mean, they've basically got a box of 4 guys, the 2 midfielders and the 2 central defenders, and they're covering a pretty decent amount of space. They're all big guys and all physical guys. That really does limit the amount of space available in the middle of the field. You open it up a little bit with a bigger field. Yes, there's a little bit more space, and obviously Nagbe can move around. But it'll be interesting to see if he can get free on his own. If they sort of physically go after him a little bit, the way that you were mentioning, both Thomas and Laronowitz, if that kind of throws Nagbe off a little bit and makes him think twice about making a little darting run. It obviously didn't bother him too much because he made a few nice runs in the game, but sort of in the flow of the formation, it didn't work as well. So yeah, there are definitely some differences, even though it is the exact same team, and I think we're going to see almost the exact same lineups for both teams. The approaches could be exactly the same, but the results could be completely different given altitude, field size, and having just seen each other before. Even if they take the same approach, they're each going to know a little something different about how it worked or didn't work the last time around. And even if it's not an overt tweak, it may just be something small that we aren't going to hear about, but we may see the results during the game.
Yeah, I mean, you asked Gavin about Nagbe and what might be different on Wednesday, and I think you basically just got well, here's an answer, because I'm not going to really discuss what we really want to do. And like you said, it may not be anything huge. The field, not only in Colorado, is the field 5 yards wider, it's 10 yards longer. And, you combine those two things, and yeah, there probably is a noticeable amount of space difference now. So he should have just a bit more room. And like you said, I think if they just tweak one or two little things with what DK's trying to do or with what Nagbe himself tries to do, I think they might be able to find and exploit that space a little bit. But yeah, I think you got the I have an answer that I'm not going to give you answer.
Yeah, definitely. Now we've got a question in the chat box that says, what did they play at the Timbers? What do they officially play against Colorado? And that's an interesting question. So the question is, did they play a 4-2-3-1? Gavin Wilkinson consistently refers to what they're doing as a 4-3-3. So in turn, that's generally the way we refer to it here as well. But then he also will, from time to time, and he especially did this yesterday, talk about Bright Dike playing up top alone. And he indicated also that he would love to play with the second forward and try and open up space. And I don't even want to go down that road right now, because I don't know why they would do that all of a sudden when they've had some success doing it this other way. But yeah, I mean, what do you think? Do you think it was a 4-2-3-1? Do you think it was a 4-3-3? I mean, you look at Sal and you look at Songo, and those are guys who have played in the midfield, sort of whatever team they've been in, they've been outside midfielders, and here they're sort of outside forwards or wide midfielders, wide of Nagbe, who's above both Jewsbury and Chara. We've described it as sort of a ladder in the midfield before too. With Jewsbury, it's the deepest, Chara somewhere above him, and Nagbe somewhere above him. So what, I mean, does it matter? I mean, does the terminology really matter when the concept is sort of the same between those kind of two descriptions?
Yeah, I think this is just sort of that area where we're trying to put a label on something so that we can talk about it and say what it is. But it sort of flexes, it changes a little bit depending on the flow of the game and whether they're on offense or defense, and just how it gets drawn up on the chalkboard that day. Because Wilkinson, depending on the team, it might be, okay, because of our opponent today, we need Nagbe and Chara to play a little bit more like this. So maybe on a given day, it looks more like a 4-3-3. But then on the next day, the next game, because of their opponent and how they expect them to play, it's all right, Nagbe, we want you to do this a little bit more. And it's all still sort of the same general thing, but it might be drawn up just a little bit different. So we might call it something just slightly different today, just because of the tweaks that we're making. For me, I would much prefer to start with, now I don't know about the rest of the numbers, but I would prefer to see the first two numbers as a 4-1. Because I think, given everything else, it just seems more and more apparent to me every game that it's 4 in the back with Jewsbury sitting in front of them by himself. At times, to me, rewatching the first half yesterday, honestly, I wanted to call it a 4-1-4-1. That's what it looked like more to me yesterday. But other games, it has looked more like a 4-1, 2-3 or something. I mean, I think we're getting a bit nitpicky here and there, but for me, it looks more like it should be a 4-1 something, whatever else you want to call it. I think it should start with a 4-1. I think Jewsbury's role has been pretty clear. and that, he's been behind Nagbe and Chara. No matter what they've been doing, he has clearly been set behind them in all of these games and in front of the back four. So, yeah, we're all getting a little bit nitpicky, and I think this is the area where people get a little bit too caught up in the formation and it doesn't quite matter and everything. But, we want a label on it so that we can talk about it and whatnot. But, yeah, I mean, it's 6-1, half a dozen of another. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think at times, without getting all nerdy about it too much, I mean, when I was doing this stuff for this book on the 1975 Timbers, this is kind of what it looked like. They had wingers on the outside in a 4-3-3, and they were the two outside forwards, but they came all the way back if needed. They played all the way up if needed. They weren't forwards in the traditional sense. It wasn't like putting DK out wide or Boyd out wide. But they also weren't like Chara. They weren't guys who you would stick in the middle of midfield at all. And so it reminds me a lot of that, because there's a very defined one forward, kind of capital F forward, traditional kind of guy, and whether that's Boyd or DK, it doesn't matter in the sense of trying to understand what the construction of the lineup is. That guy is alone as a forward. He's the only guy like that. It is not a two forward setup. And you can call it a 4-3-3 for sure, because while both Songo and Zizo have done well in getting back, and Songo has been incredibly improved in that area compared to the beginning of the year, where he absolutely did not defend under any circumstances. But their main thrust is offense. They're out there to be catalysts, to be forward players, and more often than not, you see those three guys far out ahead of everyone else. So I can definitely understand why Gavin calls it a 4-3-3. I mean, he says, he said yesterday about Bright Dike, playing as a lone forward in a 4-3-3 is tough work. Most people would say 4-3-3, you're playing with three forwards, or some description like that. And, it's very clearly one guy in the middle. So, but I agree with you. To me, the strength of the team is in that middle corridor that sometimes looks like a ladder. Sometimes it looks like there's Chara and Dewsbury behind Nagbe. Sometimes it looks like Nagbe and Chara are up and Dewsbury's back by himself. But regardless, the team wins and loses based on how those guys interact and how those guys are able to do their job in relation to the other guys on the field. When Nagbe gets pinned in and can't play out wide, he quote unquote disappears. When Dewsbury doesn't do a good job defending or finds himself sneaking forward too much and balls come into that space in front of the back two, the Timbers get burned and scored upon. When Chara is out and Alexander's in, it's a different look. Alexander's more offensive minded, I think, than Chara, and that looked different in the last game. That looked more like Dewsbury and then Nagbe and Alexander, ahead. So in the end, I'm not sure it necessarily matters as long as those guys are being successful at what their role is for that given, opponent. And that does seem to shift, but regardless, Songo and Zizo are out wide, and if they're just two wide midfielders in a 4-1-4-1 or something, then so what? They're still getting forward and giving an offensive thrust that is harder to come by, I think, when you play a 4-4-2, because in the wide, to me, I guess actually the biggest thing that's helped the Timbers be more offensive is that they've stopped relying on the outside backs to provide service. Occasionally, Kimura or Smith will come forward and they will get a ball, they'll overlap and they'll get a ball out wide. But for the most part, they're not doing that anymore. They're letting Zizo and Songo patrol the offensive part of the sideline and staying back. So that's consequently helping the Timbers not get burned on counterattacks quite as often. And it's also putting more of the offensive responsibility at the feet of guys who are better offensively. And that's leading to more chances. I mean, the more crosses that would come in from Lavelle Palmer or Mike Chabala or whatever earlier in the year, those are now crosses coming from Frank Songo and Sal Zizzo, who are infinitely better at either going toward DK or just playing it back into the middle to an on-rushing Chara or to Nagbe. That's what's really helping, and it's helping on both ends of the field. So whatever you want to call it, that's being improved, kind of week by week as those defenders are able to just defend and play the ball into the middle, and the guys aren't just running into each other on the sideline anymore, or taking up the same space or pulling defenders in towards each other. It's really kind of open space up, even in the shoebox Timbers field. Now let's actually talk a little bit here about what Gavin had to say about his starting lineup, because we've just said we think that the lineup will be exactly the same, which means we'll see Chara in the midfield, and a couple times now Gavin has sort of started to indicate, in fairness, this come from questions. He hasn't just volunteered this, and so we have to give credit to the guys who are asking those questions, but he's being asked, are you in an official 11, or do you have a set starting lineup that you now feel comfortable with? And his answer has been yes. And the explanation is that these guys have earned it. Everybody sort of had a chance when he came in to get into the lineup. Some guys were in it. Some guys have come out. We've seen Boyd be in it and now out. We've seen Wallace in it and now out. We've seen other guys like Chabala be in it and then traded. And the guys who were there, Richards in, now out. The guys who were there have earned it, according to Wilkinson. And so he said something really interesting about the 11. I'll let you explain what he said about who's playing and who's not.
Well, he said that he was happy, seemed happy and sort of set on a starting 11. And then he talked about that, like you said, the guys have earned it, that it seems fair. And he said, he specifically pointed out Eric Alexander as maybe the one guy who could feel maybe a little bit slighted or hard done by not being in the 11. And when I heard him say that, I instantly thought, my first thought was, okay, yeah, I would agree. Eric's got a pretty good argument here. But as Wilkinson continued to talk, my next thought was, wow, where does that leave Boyd? Boyd isn't in his 11 that he's set on, and he's not being mentioned as a guy who can feel slighted by not being in the 11. And, we've been talking for a week or two about Boyd and what's going to happen and where does he fit in or not fit in. And it just seems like another little, another little piece of information where everything is just indicating and leading towards that he's not part of the plans moving forward, with or without Caleb Porter. It seems sort of independent of that almost. He just does not seem to be in the plans, certainly not right now. He completely sat out 2 games in a row and then got, 5 minutes or something at the end of Friday's game. Yeah, he just, I that was the second thing I noticed, was the omission of Boyd in that statement, that he shouldn't feel slighted that he's not in the 11, which I thought was kind of an interesting omission.
Yeah, there's 2 things I want to hit on with this. One is that yesterday was the most segregated practice I've ever seen with the Timbers in terms of starters and not starters. Usually there's, that you might identify, okay, these are the guys are going to play, or you can sort of pinpoint, okay, when they're playing 8v8 or something, like most of these guys are, but it was completely separate. The starting 11 from the previous game, from Friday's game, jogged around the field with Gavin Wilkinson for the entirety of their practice. At the end, they did a bunch of sort of ab work with John Ireland, and then they played keep away, and then they left. Meanwhile, all the other guys, not the 11 starters from the last game, played 6v6 games under the direction of Sean McCauley and had a completely separate warm-up on a separate field even, And I mean, I've just not seen it that separated. And usually, even when Boyd hasn't been playing lately, he's still kind of hanging around with Smith. He's still kind of hanging around with Jewsbury. He's still kind of mingling with the guys who have been playing, who are in the starting 11. Boyd's usually kind of tagging along with them and making jokes, and very clearly, everybody respects his abilities and all these kinds of things. So he's part of that. This was completely separate. He's out there with Cam Vickers and Pablo Di Fiore and Ian Hogg. I mean, he's out there with guys that, you might say he has no business even being on the field with them. I mean, what he even in the games, I mean, he's completely outclassing everyone in the game, but he's not part of the 11. So, I mean, it was very obvious that there's sort of that Gavin is taking these guys that have been playing and playing well, by his admission, and I think by now most people are admitting that yes, this group of 11 is actually playing pretty well, and taking them aside, and I mean, it was the biggest physical difference I've seen. So that was one thing. Then the other thing, I'm trying to find the quote now. Gavin was asked about subbing Boyd in the post-game press conference. Yep. And I think a lot of people had questions about why, I mean, I even saw people like Kyle McCarthy, the national journalist based in Boston, questioning, if you're not going to play Boyd, don't play him. Why even bring him in as a sub? And so, okay, I finally found it. And so here's Gavin's answer. And this is, again, Timbers are up 1-0. It's, I think, the 88th minute. And his answer was, Boyd is a very intelligent player, and getting him to sit to stop those two, meaning the two central midfielders, Thomas and Lorenowitz, stop those two from being able to play out was my reasoning for that. He also deserves a lot of respect, and you have to look after him. And I think people saw that and thought it was like a babying comment. And he was talking about Colorado needing to, like, it's not like Gavin wasn't saying Chris deserves a lot of respect and I have to look after him. He's saying he commands a lot of respect from the other team. The other team has to account for him. And so basically his answer was, he's on the field because they can't cheat up at the end of the game and send everyone forward, because there's still the possibility that a ball could come over the top and Boyd could play it in and score and make it 2-0. And so that was his answer. So he had an explanation, which I give him credit for answering the question and giving an answer. My question to you is that utter nonsense at that point in the game? I mean, is there any, like, it's a clear explanation, but does that actually make sense? I mean, is preventing either Thomas or Lorenowitz from getting forward, neither of whom really went forward that much all game anyway, I mean, is that a good reason to put this? I mean, because it's kind of an embarrassing move on some level. I mean, it's got to be embarrassing for Boyd to essentially be a time-wasting sub. And, if the most that his role was to prevent Hendry Thomas from getting forward, I mean, that's a little bit of almost an insult. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't meant that way by Wilkinson, but that's the way it comes off, and that has to be at least somewhat considered when you're talking about a guy who's making this much money and has this level of status and is the obvious sort of face of what has gone wrong with the Timbers, fairly or unfairly. That just kind of piles it on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get it. You're bringing in a guy who's known for scoring goals. So you can't cheat off this guy. You can't just forget about him for the last 5 minutes and go bombing forward to try to get an equalizer, because this is a guy who can score, but this is also a guy who's not particularly mobile. And two center backs could probably, for the last 5 minutes, deal with him just fine while everybody else goes bombing forward. To me, it just seemed like, it can't be a curtain call, but it just seemed like more of just a move just because you have nothing else that you have to do. Nobody else is injured. Nobody else is tired. You've got a chance to put your DP making $1.5 million a year in a game when he hasn't played in 2 games. So let's just get him in there. I just seemed like one of those things where it was, we've got a substitute to use. So maybe this will placate Chris a little bit. I don't know. That's all I can come up with. It was just let's do it just to do it, I guess.
It was interesting because Gavin said that he wanted Boyd to come in and kind of sit there and not. He basically compared him to DK and said DK sometimes overcommits, and that's fine through the course of the game. But at the end of the game, he wanted Boyd to be able to just sit there and occupy these 2 guys. But to me, I get that. That makes sense. Boyd is pretty good at just kind of sitting there. But to me, Facito is the perfect guy if you're going to make a change. Make a guy who's annoying. I mean, bring in a guy who's annoying, who buzzes around, who challenges everything, who runs hard. He's going to occupy those guys more than Boyd is, because they barely had to look at Boyd. They knew he wasn't going to make a run over the top. They knew he wasn't going to try and get in behind. And the Timbers weren't even looking to play the ball to him in behind or anything else. I mean, it just seemed like I agree with you. It seemed like they were just doing it because, well, he hasn't played in a while, and it's almost more embarrassing to have to pay a guy this much and not play him ever. But to me, it didn't end up mattering. But I guess to me, Facito would have been a better option there, just because of the style of player that he is. But yeah, it was an interesting move, and obviously we'll keep tabs on anything else that we see with Boyd. The team is training now and leaving today, so there's nothing else to see between now and then. But
which I'll talk about a little bit. I want to kind of circle back to some stuff that you mentioned, and I don't know this. I've always been very curious about, with the road form that the team has had, their planning and scheduling and travel on road games. It has always seemed odd to me, and I think this is another example of it. You talked about the separation between the starters and everybody else at training yesterday, and the guys who play 90 minutes, the guys who start, usually do a regeneration session called a regen session. If they play on Saturday, everybody gets Sunday off, and then the starters have a regen session on Monday. And so they do stuff a little bit separate from everybody else. Well, if yesterday was just a regen session, it would appear as though they played on Friday, they got Saturday and Sunday off, Monday's a regen day, so the starters don't really practice. Today is a travel day, so they have an early training session, which they're not training particularly hard today. It's a quick session, and then they travel, and then they play tomorrow. And I don't know. I guess that's always sort of bothered me, given their road concerns, that you wouldn't leave maybe a day earlier than normal and train there. At the stadium, at wherever you're going to play, and actually get in a training session, not just a knock-around session. They're not going to do that tonight. So maybe tomorrow they go out and they knock it around in the morning on the field or something. But I don't know. I've always been sort of intrigued by some of those scheduling issues. And I just thought you talking about, having them separated and the starters doing their regen session just got me thinking again about the timing and the build-up to, again, an away match, and just the scheduling of it all, and how that impacts, because basically the starters aren't really going to have any kind of a training session between these 2 matches. They're going to have a couple half sessions, but that's it. I mean, if you even want to call it half sessions, yesterday was just nothing but a regen session, where they jogged and played a little bit of 5v2, some of them. I've always been intrigued by that, and I don't know how much it plays into their road performances, but I think it'll be interesting. It's always been intriguing to me. I'm not sure. But moving on to tomorrow's match and what we think about what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, I want to mention quickly, I mentioned that Omar Cummings won't be available for Colorado. Neither will Steve Purdy, who hasn't been in the 18 recently, Lavelle Palmer, who wasn't in the 18 the other night, and Rodney Wallace, who was a substitute and has been coming on as a substitute. So Wallace, Palmer, Purdy out, unavailable, and that we had someone, PDX Bound on Twitter, ask us who then is going to be a backup outside back. Who's going to go on this trip now that Chabala is gone? Palmer, who could play right back. Purdy, who plays right back. Wallace could play left back. There's actually nobody apart from potentially moving Jewsbury back in the case of an injury out of their normal group of guys who is going to be available. So very quickly, because we've only got a couple more minutes, what do you think? Do you think they bring Ryan Kowalik along for a ride just because? Do you think they bring Freddie Braun along for that kind of a potential backup role? And one other weird thing I'll throw out there, which I know won't happen, but Eric Bruner for some reason was sending in crosses from the left at training last week before the first Colorado game. At the end of practice, they were playing balls to wide midfielders and outside backs, and they were sending crosses into Richards and DK and whatever. And for some reason, Eric Bruner kept being one of the guys tracking down the balls and sending them in. So made me think maybe he's in line for a switch to left back or something. Not obviously not, but that was a weird thing that I meant to mention last week. But yeah, so what do you think? They bring someone new, or do they just hope no one gets hurt? And if they do, drop Jewsbury back in as an outside back?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, what do they do? I have no idea. I mean, even if you bring one of these guys, none of them have played left back. Purdy's done it a little bit in reserve games. It seems like maybe I don't even think we saw Kowalik at left back at all. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what you do if an outside back goes down. I mean, I guess I'd like to see him bring Kowalik. I've always been pleased with the way he's played, but I don't know. Freddie Braun, I guess, gives you more options if you bring him because he's also a midfielder, so he can kind of serve dual roles. I don't know. Bruner is a left back someday. I mean, that's not going to happen tomorrow, but someday.
Well, and the other question was, would Ian Hogg be brought along and because he is a left back, and I would say no, definitely not. I don't think that they'll be bringing him. I mean, he is still trying to kind of work his way in, and he got a little bit of a leg injury yesterday, but he's not ready to go anyway. I'd prefer to see Braun at left back than Hogg in the first team at this point. It definitely it's a little bit odd that they would let those three guys go all at once, given what positions they play. But on the other hand, is it really fair to limit guys who don't play a lot anyway and prevent them from playing in World Cup qualifiers? I mean, that's just as valuable time in some instances as first team time. So, all right, quickly, predictions for tomorrow's game. We've got about a minute left, so we'll fly through this. I say that the Timbers will win. I think they figured out this is the best possible chance they're going to have the rest of the year to get an away win, and I think they get it done.
I would love to predict an away win, but until they actually do it, I'm going to have to go with a loss on the road, as is producer Trevor. He is predicting a loss as well. Fantasy update real quickly. It's a strange round with the World Cup qualifying with the window, the FIFA window in there. So this round extends for a week and a half with a couple games tomorrow, a couple on the weekend, and then all the games. So good luck setting your lineup because who knows what's going to change in a week and a half. But make sure and check that out and make any changes there.
Indeed. So we'll be back on Friday afternoon. We'll talk about what happened in the Colorado game, the second Colorado game, and start with a little bit of a longer-term preview of the Seattle game, which is the Timbers' next game, which is coming up on the 15th. So until then, this is Mal.
And this is Kelly. We'll see you again on Friday.
Speak to you then.
slow jamming today.